Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to MC Webinars. Today, we're looking at how MC can support you in making your key labour market decisions going forward this difficult time that we're all in. Hope you're all keeping well. We're joined by Andy Derman, who is our Managing Director at MC, and also Duncan Brown, who is our Senior Economist. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please make sure you put them in the questions box on your control panel, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Andy and Duncan. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hi there, thank you, Debbie, and hello, everyone. I join you from my self-isolation sick bed in Basingstoke. So please forgive any coughing and spluttering and my rather low radio voice right now. But I figured if Boris can run the country from his sick bed, I should certainly drag myself out and cover this really important topic, especially as so many of you have joined us today. I'm joined, as Debbie mentioned, with by Duncan Brown. Say hi, Duncan.
Hi, Duncan. I'm without coronavirus and happily ensconced at home in my own bubble.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And Duncan's going to be providing some fantastic insights as we all try and get to grips with what's going on out there, and obviously our particular focus around what's happening in the labour market right now. So if we move on, Duncan, to the next slide. So I just want to talk through what we're intending to cover today. So for any new watchers, viewers today, just take a few moments just to introduce you to MZ, who we are. Then we'll have a little look at some of the goals that Duncan and I are keen to cover off today, and then we'll dive into the meaty content before finishing off by pointing you towards some further resources should you wish to explore further. So in terms of introducing MZ, just wanted to welcome any new webinar attendees. So our goal at MZ, our mission, our reason for being is to help organisations and individuals make better, more informed choices about the local economy and the labour market. And we do this through building and providing really granular insights about the labour market, what you'll hear referred to as labour market information or labour market insight. Our goal is to help empower key local decision makers to understand what is going on in the labour market so that they can make the relevant choices, informed choices using a strong evidence base. We typically work across, I suppose, three core environments in the UK. We do a lot of work in the education space, where we help educators think about what local employer demand looks like and how that can be aligned back into the education offer they have. We also help educators to align their engagement strategies, whether that be in terms of recruiting students or engaging employers around real need in their local economy. We also work with economic developers. Some of that is in the development of the skills agenda for regions, but also thinking about the workforce that's already installed within the region and how that can be used to engage and support business. And finally, we work in the employment sphere. So that's really about understanding what's happening in local economies where the labour markets they seek can be found, and think creatively about the labour dynamics affecting hiring activities. So whilst we've been doing this for many years in general terms, of course, we find ourselves in fairly unprecedented times. And our goal really through the last couple of weeks as this has unfolded in the UK has been to try and illuminate some of those key trends that we've been seeing in the local economy, to share those with our audience and hopefully help you navigate your own activities through these tough times. So in terms of then what we want to cover off today, I've set out 3 key objectives. First one is to explore what we can learn about what is happening right now and how the labour market is responding to the COVID-19 challenge. Secondly, we want to help you interpret and understand that data. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to understanding various labour market trends, and we thought this was a perfect opportunity to illuminate some of those nuances and share those with you so that you can be understanding what's going on thereafter. And thirdly, I want to point you towards a whole range of different resources that we're building that hopefully will help you through these challenging times. So I'm going to hand over now to Duncan to share a little bit about what we've observed thus far, certainly focused over the last couple of weeks, and what we're able to extract from the insights that we have. So over to you, Duncan.
Thanks, Andy. Have a breather, probably best for you. So yeah, so I'm going to take you through some of the data that's been emerging, and just to sort of give you some thoughts on how to conceive of the situation we have now entered and what's going to be coming along in its wake as well. So first of all, just to sort of help contextualize really what's happening with the economy. Obviously, the sort of the top headlines are inevitably about the coronavirus and the sort of the caseload and what's going on there in the fight against it, and obviously that is the most important. But of course, the byproduct of the lockdown is that it's a real sudden stop to a lot of sectors of the economy all at once. We're seeing sort of certain kinds of businesses that just have to close down. It's all right for, you know, many of us on this call can at least kind of manage some level of working activity in our jobs from home. But many parts of the economy just don't exist without the workplace. So, you know, if you think about, for example, pubs and restaurants, and they exist as places for people to meet. They can't go on in a lockdown condition, and so that just means that they stop. That means that it's very different from the economic contractions that we used to. If you think about the last recession in 2008 to 9, that was started with the financial crisis. And that led, because of the sort of the freezing of the financial system, to a collapse in demand, which then the government had to sort of seek to mitigate and fight against. Whereas this time, actually, what we're seeing is supply and demand both stop at the same time, both get disrupted at the same time. And so that's quite different. And it's not simply a matter of the government being able to kind of stimulate the economy back to life, because actually the government has intentionally closed down part of the economy as part of the lockdown. The nearest analogy, by the way, is actually what happens every year at Christmas, but that's planned and lasts for about a week or something like that, that we turn off part of the economy for a while. Whereas, of course, this is for a much longer period and even an uncertain period, and wasn't planned on. And so it's quite a different kind of economic contraction to the ones that we're used to. And you know, the government is trying to limit the damage with its support schemes for workers' wages where they can't attend at work, with self-employed grants and business interruption loans and things like that. But all of this is putting economic linkages under severe stress. And if you think about an economy as a really complex web of connections between workers and workplaces and investors and all of that, you know, those relationships are premised on everything being a going concern. It keeps going all the time. Whereas stopping large parts of it means that it starts to get frayed at the edges, and those connections are probably a lot quicker to break than they are to build. And so the concern is, as it goes longer, then, you know, we'll start to see more damage creeping in. And today in the US, in the last hour, they've released they do weekly numbers there on how many people have claimed unemployment insurance for the first time. And it's 6.6 million workers this week have claimed unemployment insurance, which is several, I think about 4 percentage points of the US workforce. And so you can see the kind of problems. Now, hopefully, when our unemployment data comes through next month, the steps that the government have taken will help to mitigate that. But you know, inevitably, there is going to be some fallout here. And so that's what we wanted to look at today. So one of the things that we provide at MZ is job postings data. So we go across the internet and we collect from tens of thousands of job boards, and we typically collect about 800 500,000 to 1 million unique job postings a month. We do a lot of work to duplicate them because they can appear in more than one place. And the data updates daily, about a day or two in arrears. And what it's showing at the moment is a pretty stark drop. So you can see on the chart on the left here, it's fallen by about 15% in the last few weeks since March the 7th there. It's 15% down on a year ago as well. And it's 250,000 job postings less than there were back on the 7th of March. Yeah, it's pretty startling, the drop there. I think it's something like 10 out of the last 11 days have seen a drop. Yeah, we've not seen a drop like that before. We've collected job postings since the start of 2016, and we've not seen anything like that before. And the chart on the right there shows another way of looking at the same data alongside the exponential curve that we're all quite used to of the number of coronavirus cases. And you can see this sort of the slight mirror image there, that where over the past week or two, as it's got to sort of become recognised as such a national crisis, then it's really started to sort of tell on our coronavirus cases.
Duncan,
Yeah.
experienced MZ viewers will know that MZ sits on a whole range of labour market intelligence. Why have we chosen job postings in this instance to give us our indication?
So that's a good question, because there's the very good reason is its timeliness. So this data, as I say, updates every day, and so, excuse me, and so we get a bit of a real-time view on what's going on in the economy. Whereas our labour market intelligence actually is reliant on government sources, and they are based on surveys that take quite a long while to come through. And so it's actually going to be, in terms of our labour market intelligence, telling us what goes on in particular places with job numbers in different industries, it'll be many months before that starts to come through from the government sources. And so, but of course, we all want to know what's happening now. The flip side of that is, and why MZ provides both of those types of data, is that the labour market intelligence is much more reliable from a quantitative perspective. Job postings are a reflection of what employers are advertising for, and that's a noisy indicator of underlying employment demand. So you have to sort of understand that. And you can see from that chart on the left there that job postings data goes up and down day by day. It is quite normal to see quite a lot of volatility in there. What's striking now is that actually there's a very decisive move in one direction, and so that's why we thought it was definitely worth sharing. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's just the sheer timeliness, because you know the first official labour market data that we'll get coming through to actually tell us what's going on will be the March unemployment data, which will come in late April, and so that's quite a while to wait. So we can use the same data to also look at the kinds of jobs that are being affected. And so on the left here, we've broken them down by the 9 major groups of the ONS Standard Occupation Classification, or SOC. And so you can see that sales and customer service jobs and skilled trades have seen more than a fifth of their job postings falling off in the last few weeks. Same with elementary occupations as well. In numbers terms, you get more at professional and technical levels. So you can see there's about 120, 130,000 across those two categories alone. They tend to be better advertised online, and that's something you have to be aware of with job postings data. But yeah, in proportionate terms, it's those skilled trades, sales and customer service roles that are really leading the sort of the move downwards. And of course, sales and customer service, many of those jobs require sort of face-to-face interactions, and so outside of kind of supermarket retail, you know, most of those positions are under a lot of pressure at the moment. On the right hand side, we go to the much more detailed level, the 4-digit level as it's known on occupations, and you can see that there are some huge falls there for programmers, chefs, salespeople, kitchen and catering assistants, a lot of roles in kind of either hospitality or sort of corporate and tech roles there. Some of that reflects that they're quite large labour markets, but some of it also reflects, you know, if you think about chefs and kitchen and catering assistants, where it's quite understandable why there'd be a big stop on recruitment there. The sort of the worrying side is that the sort of the fastest growing are actually adding just tens of job postings there. So you look at food, drink and tobacco process operatives who work in factories, that's just a net increase of 40 over the past few weeks. So it's held up, but it's not really made a big advance.
A couple of observations, Duncan, just would like your thoughts on. So on the left-hand side, it strikes me that it's probably those mid to lower skilled, i.e. below the associate professional roles that are being affected mostly, except for the caring side, which is for obvious reasons. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you just think about it in terms of who can work from home, managers, professional, and a lot of technical roles, not all of them, but can actually have that degree of flexibility. Whereas if you think about, say, process plant and machine operatives, well, you have to go to the factory to operate the process and plant and machine. You have to, if you're sales and customer services, well, outside of call center roles, but even then you have to go to a call center unless that can be virtualized. So yeah, a lot of those are much more at the whims of a lockdown, whereas most of the people on this call will be in a professional managerial role, and most of us can do our work, or the majority of it, from a home location, really.
And we've also heard in the press a real clamour for certain types of jobs, thinking about shelf stackers and supermarket workers to ensure that we have sufficient supplies available to us. But they don't seem to be jumping out here. I know from watching these charts day to day, they've appeared and then disappeared. What's again, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and it's worth saying, as I haven't mentioned it before, and you just alluded to it there, that all these, a lot of these charts are actually on a live dashboard that's available on our website. But yeah, in terms of that question about the sort of the jobs that are in demand, one of the quirks of looking at online postings is that we detect the posting, we don't know how many jobs it refers to, and that's what I mentioned earlier about the sort of the noisy nature of job postings as an indicator of employer demand. So if a supermarket in your local area puts out a job ad, they might actually be recruiting for 100 extra people, but it's just one job posting. And so actually in situations like this where they're buying in bulk, as it were, job postings might underplay that to some extent. So there might be some of that going on. And it's interesting that the numbers aren't big, but we do see some of the obvious jobs coming to the surface there. So you can see, there are some strange ones like musicians and artists. They're probably just slow burn recruitment processes that aren't moving that much. But up there you've got hospital porters. Sadly, you've got undertakers, mortuary and crematorium assistants. LGV drivers are in there as well. So some of them are there, but of course they may be just a small number of postings reflecting a large number of jobs. Okay, so another thing that we can look at is in terms of skills. So what I did here, all our job postings are classified against our library of nearly 30,000 skills. So these are skills that are mentioned in job postings. So what we did was we took the top 100 hard skills that were mentioned on the 7th of March, and we looked on the 1st of April to see which ones had fallen furthest and fastest. And so on the left, we've got the ones that have fallen most, and it's quite an interesting combination of technology skills. You'll remember that programmers were the fastest falling occupation, and restaurant and customer facing skills in there. So you've got restaurant operation falling by a third in that time, customer experience there falling by a quarter, cooking's up there, and then you've got some technology, so React.js, front-end software engineering, Microsoft Azure, and things like that. Whereas on the right-hand side, you'll see that sort of some of the smallest fallers are actually dominated by some of the sort of more welfare-related skills. So you've got things like autism, learning disabilities, but also child protection, and of course nursing in there. So it kind of tells a story. Once we get into the more detailed level, it'll be a lot more interesting as the weeks go by, because some of the trends will start to come through a bit more strongly. One of the strange things about job postings, of course, is that there can be some job postings that are still online now where they've been pre-programmed to be online, and then they will just disappear and then they won't be replaced by others. And so as time goes on, the trends will become much stronger.
I suppose also it's important to say when we say job posting declines, that doesn't necessarily imply redundancies. It just is implying a slowing down of the hiring activities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be said that in labour market terms, often that's it's the slowing down in hiring that is what gives the biggest rise to unemployment. Yeah, even during a boom time, there are always people losing their jobs. Sad to say, but it is true. There's always businesses somewhere that are struggling and making redundancies. What tends to be the most decisive influence in a recession is that demand stops. So it's difficult for people who lose their jobs to find new jobs, and so all of a sudden you get this surge upwards. So in that sense, it's kind of it's more of an early indicator of where the problems will be in terms of people being able to find jobs, rather than necessarily meaning that people are losing them. That's why the unemployment data, when that comes through next month, will be really powerful to put alongside the job postings data, so we can see where people are losing them as well as where jobs are not being created anymore. One other dimension that we can look at, of course, is geography, and we can see that every region, and these are the sort of government office regions in England, and then Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales in there as well. And we can see that everywhere has been affected to some extent or other. The southeast is the least affected in proportionate terms, while Scotland is the most, followed by Northern Ireland. And then on the right hand side, what we've done is we've taken the sort of the case prevalence. So this is the number of COVID cases reported in each region per 100,000 population on the x-axis against the decline in job postings. And you can see there's sort of a bit of a spread there, where London is, as we are all fairly well aware, I think, the sort of area with the highest prevalence of cases, but actually is so far not too badly affected in terms of the reduction in demand. That's much more spread out. Now, of course, this will reflect the kind of the mix of industries, and that's where looking at labour market intelligence will become much more important, because certain kinds of industries are more exposed to the lockdown because they can't operate. London has a much higher prevalence of professional work, for example, and so therefore it's much easier to kind of make that switch. But sad to say, as the weeks ahead go on, we can probably expect most of these regions to move sort of down and to the right to some extent, and so that's something that we definitely want to keep a track on.
And what's Scotland jumps out to me here, and Northern Ireland showing a relatively low prevalence, yet a fairly impactful decline in job posting activity. Scotland sort of on the slightly larger impact, of course, from the illness side, and is at the extremity in terms of job posting declines. Any clues as to why that might be?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to the point I made about noise, that it could be that there are underlying factors that if coronavirus hadn't happened, maybe Northern Ireland and Scotland wouldn't have been doing so, growing at the same rate as other places anyway. So we have to be aware of that. And again, this is one of those things where, as time goes on, the trend will become clearer. Where it is coronavirus related, it's probably somewhat to do with the mix of industries and how they're affected as well. But yeah, it's too early to be absolutely sure about what's driving that. But yeah, certainly the mix of industries would be a part of it. But as I say, there could be just other factors that are going on that mean that their starting position was lower for some reason at this time of year.
Yeah, and I wonder, I know certainly Scotland took a pretty early stance, didn't it, in the lockdown, and has maybe taken a slightly more extreme relative to the rest. I
seem to remember on construction, Scotland was much clearer in terms of closing down construction work, weren't they? So that could be a big part of it as well. So yeah, there are lots of potential reasons and pathways, but yeah, I think that the fact that London and the southeast are least affected is probably much more clearly sort of understood in terms of their industry mix. Whereas the other regions are, potentially lots of facets there. Northern Ireland, of course, because of its geographic location, does have a slightly different path economically as well. So there are a few different facets to the situation. But yeah, just to kind of draw a line under that sort of discussion there, I've also plotted it out here in terms of every local authority area in the country. And you can see that sort of almost every area, there are a couple of outliers, one of which just has some noisy data because somebody's changed how they advertise, I think, which is down south, and that's bright yellow patch, which is Wealdon. But almost every other area has seen a decline to some extent, and some of them much starker than others. And so you can see that this is a sort of a problem confronting pretty much every part of the UK. So yeah, that's that on the sort of the real-time data.
Great, thank you. So thanks, Duncan, and that's really a helpful walkthrough, I suppose, of what we've been able to find out now. What we're going to come on to think about now is what might this mean going forward. So I'll hand back to you again to kind of share a few different dimensions of thinking that we've certainly been doing about what this might mean looking forward as everyone starts to get over the shock of the quick disruption to all of our lives and start to think about what this means. So yeah, over to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of slides on just some sort of examples of analysis of the kind of things that we're starting to look at to just kind of unpack the sort of the economic consequences of the lockdown and where we go from there, and then some ways of thinking about it and how we're approaching our data development and product development over the next months ahead. And so the first one, we put this out on the blog last week, I think, which is when the government announced its key worker list, which was pretty broad. We found out, I think it was about a third of the workforce were in industries that could be conceived of as being key workers. And so the map on the left there shows that almost every part of the country has sort of at least a sixth of its jobs in key worker industries. And I think it's I can't remember the local authority there now in Cumbria, but it's the one with Sellafield in. If there's anybody on the call, then I apologise because my mind has gone blank at this point. But it's where Barrow-upon-Furness is. And so you've got Sellafield there, and obviously civil nuclear is part of the key worker industry. So it gets to about half of the workforce there. But across the country, you can see that there's large parts of it where it's a third or more. What we also did was for each of those industry groups that the government named, so you can see them on the chart on the right there, health and social care, obviously the biggest, education, childcare, food and other necessary goods, and so on. What we did was we picked out the occupations that really make those industries distinctive and from the wider workforce, and we used those to conceive of what are the key worker jobs in each industry. And so you can see that about 2/3 of jobs in health and social care are actually what you consider frontline jobs, so doctors, nurses, people like those. And then the other million or so are in the supply chain and the administrative environment, and so they're also important. But it's there are key workers, and then there are frontline key workers as well. And so again, in education and childcare, you've got those that are actually working with the children directly, and then those that are in the sort of the office environment as well. And you can go through there. And so what we're looking to be able to do is kind of unpack this analysis further and sort of look at how these distribute across different parts of the country, and how important they are to the local economy, and how therefore the local economy can ensure that those key workers are supported to make sure they're going in within wider regions as well.
And aside from the very short term of just making sure that these people can find their way to work and keep working, how might this help us, this kind of analysis help us understand the sort of medium to long term of different localities and how where their priorities may lie from a labour market and economy standpoint?
Yeah, well, of course, one of the great uncertainties with the coronavirus response is how long different phases will go for. How long will we be in permanent lockdown? How long will we need to maintain a enhanced capacity in terms of these key worker industries? And one of the potential solutions that we will need to start working on as that sort of that enhanced capacity phase goes through, is how we make sure that potentially a larger number of these jobs are going to be supported. And of course, within a local economy, you've potentially got workers losing their jobs, and you want to be able to think about what kinds of skills that are needed in these key worker jobs, especially the frontline ones, and how can we reallocate those that are losing their jobs into those positions. And so actually understanding what the demands are for key workers, where they're concentrated now, and therefore where they're likely to grow fastest, is really important. And once you start linking that to the skill sets that they have, which we can do that with ONET data, and then we can look at the skills of the people who are losing jobs and sort of see how we can maybe get some alignment into it and actually alleviate some of those capacity constraints and make sure that we're able to maintain the enhanced kind of key worker services to support the country through the sort of the rest of the coronavirus period. Okay, so I'll go on to the next one. So another aspect of it is actually just thinking through what the fallout is going to be from effectively closing down parts of the economy and putting them into hibernation. So one of the things that we have at EMSI is an input-output economic model, which we've got specified down to local authority level and for 4-digit or detailed industries. And so what we've just run here is to just look at the pubs and restaurant industries and see what happens through the input-output model if we close them down for a month on the left-hand side. So if you take a month of wages out of the economy by closing pubs and restaurants, and hopefully the government schemes will help to alleviate that, but we've seen with reports about the Wetherspoons chain and Rick Stein's restaurants that for cash flow reasons, some of them are closing before those schemes will come fully online. If you cut off the pubs and restaurants for a month, that takes £2.7 billion of earnings out of the economy, 1.9 billion for workers within the industry. So there's, I think, about 1.6 million or something, 1.7 million workers who are directly in the industry. But then there's another 400,000 or so that are in workplaces that are dependent on the pubs and restaurants because they're supplying goods and services to it, and so that adds up to another 800 to 900 million on top of that. So yeah, a month without pubs and restaurants directly takes out 2.7 billion pounds of earnings. So quite a massive effect from just that one particular group of industries. And then on the right hand side we can see the jobs that are dependent in the supply chain. And so as I say, about 1.7 million jobs in the industries themselves, but another 367,000 are in the supply chain. And there you can see it's kind of retail sales jobs, temporary employment, cleaning, accountants, all kinds of jobs that are out there that these businesses support. And so this kind of data can be really important in understanding sort of the ramifications for local economies, but also you can look at it a different way. If you're a business in one of those industries, which industries are going to be affected and how is that going to affect the sort of the market space that you've got to work with? How is it going to affect your demand? Are all important questions in a local area. So actually, this kind of data will become really important in terms of surviving over the sort of the lockdown period, and if, as seems possible from what the government have said, if there are continued sort of lower level lockdown measures even after we are allowed to start moving about more freely, just understanding how those restrictions on economic activity can become really valuable.
And presumably what we talked about earlier about those types of industries that could continue working, I'd imagine things like accounting and bookkeeping would be so, but if they don't have any of their customers working, that's where the real knock-on effects happen. And therefore, as an accounting company, what this is suggesting is if you're reliant on restaurants and bars as a major customer group, it's time to pivot and pivot quickly in the short term, even if you can go back to the norm in the long term in due course.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding the sort of the risks and opportunities sometimes inherent in your sort of business environment is really critical now because things are changing so fast.
And this is the sort of analysis that we can be doing for different sectors in specific localities?
Yeah, absolutely. Our model is specified down to local authority level, which means that we can construct models in different regions very quickly. So yeah, very flexible in that way. So just to try and understand how these kinds of analysis are going to come together to sort of deal with the kinds of problems that people who are making decisions in the economy are going to be facing the challenges over the coming months. I've put together this kind of framework really. So really I've divided the time horizon into three really. So we've got this short-term period that we're in now. While we're in lockdown, we don't know how long that's going to be. The government don't know, or haven't announced a clear timescale. But for as long as it's going on, it's important to be able to track those really rapid changes that are going on around us, keep those key services operating, and sort of limit damage and triage issues as they emerge. As you say, if you're in business, understanding what's happening to your market demand. If you're in economic development, understanding sort of how to stop the damage getting too great. If you're in education, how to understand how you can respond to labour market problems and how help people adapt to them. And so there on the intelligence side, the things that are going to become valuable are posting volumes, as we've already seen, unemployment data, which will be coming through at the end of April. And unemployment data can be linked to occupation, and so we can start to look at it in terms of very specific local labour market questions. And then the input-output modelling, as we were just saying there, and looking at these questions around key workers, which industries are more affected by having less worker flexibility and things like that, and also economic impact from slowdowns in different sectors. Then after, hopefully in the not too distant future, after the lockdown ends, we move to the medium term, when we begin to surface. There may be sort of some level of lockdown still going on, maybe localized, maybe sort of every now and then there'll be sort of resurfacing, but we can begin to start assessing the damage, identifying and monitoring the priorities, and reconnecting those parts of the economy that have been broken up by the sort of the freeze that we've had in the lockdown. So that involves matching and adapting skills supply and demand. So understanding what the sort of the economy looks like afterwards in terms of the job counts in different places, in different industries, will start to become important there. Understanding the skills that people have and people need as well, and so and how they translate between them and how industries are changing will become important. And then after that, which we're probably talking, sort of, I don't know, 18 months away probably, or it could be a year if it goes well, could be 2 years if it goes long. It's long term, and it's how we reset strategy for the years after the crisis. The likelihood is that while in many ways economies have a degree of what's called path dependency, they tend to persist in many ways, especially at local level. There are also the fact that some of the changes that are going on will also have persistence. And so, people are trying out internet shopping that have never tried it before at the moment. Just on that one particular thing, it's likely that the demand for internet shopping will be higher in the future than it was going to be otherwise. People are discovering that they can work from home when they never knew they could before, so that will change things. And then there'll be changes elsewhere. Businesses will be suddenly looking at automation technology that was potential before, but now facing potential absences of workers of 2 weeks at a time for self-isolation reasons. Even after a lockdown, all of a sudden being less reliant upon your workers being there will make you take a different view to technology. Trade, we have suddenly discovered that actually supply chains can be quite fragile in situations like this, and so that may lead to a push to insource some of the economic production that we've got. So all of these things are going to create lots of risks and opportunities all around it. And so bringing the data together to understand how the economy looks after the coronavirus starts to become really important, and how technology is changing it, how trade is changing it, and what it's doing to industry growth and the demand for skills all come to the fore.
Fascinating when you think about those potentials, isn't it? And the fact that even just 2 weeks in, we're all part of a fairly significant and sizable cultural shift right now, and learning new ways of working, new ways of entertaining ourselves, and consuming. So fantastic.
And just to bring this section to a close, really, we've got our plans which follow from that, really. as we've shown, real-time data from job postings is central at the moment, and as time goes on, trends will become clearer. We'll start to be able to unpack that in much greater detail. As I've said, unemployment data emerging from like April, we'll start to do a lot more with that. We provide labour market projections, and as you can imagine, they are almost definitely entirely wrong now, because the world is changing so quickly, and they will need to be updated. But we provide projections as a baseline for people to plan against. We don't get into the forecasting game, and therefore our projections are based on hard data, and so there's no point in are attempting to guess the outcome of all this. We're going to wait until there's fresh data later in the year that helps us to understand how the economy has changed and is changing as a result of all this. And so as soon as we've got hard data, we'll be revising all those projections. For now, they provide a baseline of what the path the economy was on before. And we also provide our customers with that input-output model, which can investigate those emerging what ifs. So we've got a tool there that allows you to look at variations from that baseline. And so that's the approach that we take to it, that rather than attempting to kind of guess what the whole economy looks like, we take the best of what we know so far from the past, and then we look at particular scenarios rather than attempting to reconceive of the whole thing from, in the middle of a highly volatile situation.
And of course, just thinking about kind of the structural LMI that we've referenced thus far, and our customers are familiar with, the projections, as you say, give a sense of direction, and in the absence of anything else, should still be useful to think about the underlying structures of economies, and hopefully by the time we return out of this, those building blocks will largely be there. There will be change, of course, but there always is. This is just happening in a shorter space of time than normal. But of course, having that sense of the 2020 workforce profile that we have at least gives us an understanding of what the stock of labour was pre-COVID, so we can start to use that as a base point for still understanding what kind of talent, skill sets and workforce lies within different areas, and it might be more about how we transition that than necessarily how that continues on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, regional economies are actually quite difficult to change. I mean, that's why in good times, we know that areas that struggle with regeneration, it's quite difficult to get a local economy to take a wholly different path, because actually path dependency, as we call it, is really quite important. You got to where you got to, there's a history to it. You have all these workers, these businesses, these relationships in an area, and so things don't just sort of completely transform from one stage to the next in most cases. And so even if there is kind of some damage from the lockdown that has to be recovered, you can imagine that generally speaking, industries that were strong in an area will tend to be strong in the future. It's rare that you have just a massive turnaround in that way. And so actually, at the moment, especially because we don't even know how long the lockdown is going to be, the past is still a good, important piece of information about the future, and we shouldn't underplay that.
Great, thank you, Duncan, and I hope that was helpful and enlightening to our audience. It's certainly been fascinating working these things through over the last 2 weeks or so internally, and glad that we've had the opportunity to share. And what I'd like to do now, just to conclude, is to point you towards a series of resources and areas in which hopefully EMSI can be helpful to you. Duncan referenced this earlier, but you'll recognize a lot of the stats if you've already accessed our national dashboard. So we've built, and I say we, I mean Duncan in his excellence has built a dashboard just to keep a track of these moving statistics on a day-to-day basis. And if you move on one more, Duncan, one of the things we've recently done is added a little button to the page, so the web address is there. Click on that button and we'll be delighted to send you a localized static report for your area of some of these key measures. And I know a good number of people have already made that request. So be sure to stick that on your favorites and keep an eye on how things are tracking. We, as you've found out, running a series of blogs and webinars and collaborations, and so I would highly recommend keeping an eye over our blog. So all of the articles that we've been referenced, the first place they go is the blog. You can subscribe there so we can keep you up to speed. And we will continue, Duncan, just move forward. We'll continue our series of webinars. I'll reference more down the line, but you can keep an eye on our webinars page as we advertise our new webinars. The other thing that we wanted to flag up is a series of our kind of commercial services that you might be interested in as you dig deeper into this. So the dashboard that we've referenced, we've been able to replicate that for localities, and so just contact us if you'd be interested in keeping track or publishing that on your own websites to help your communities understand what's going in your localities. As Duncan referenced, our data is built from very granular localities, and so we can reflect individual local authorities or LEP areas there and build, and that's then has a daily update for you there. So do let us know if you're interested in that one. Our analyst product, which many of you may be familiar with, is our repository, our research repository of all of our data, including the job postings analysis that we've been mentioning. We've very recently made the switch to actually update those job postings on a daily rather than monthly basis to enable our analyst customers to keep track and undertake the sorts of research for their own focus areas we've been discussing here. So hopefully we've given you a few ideas to take away and explore, and of course our customer service and account managers would be happy to help you with that. And then finally, where you have very specific needs, then our consulting research, custom research kicks in, and Duncan and his team are on hand to answer key questions around your labour market of interest, whether that's regionally or sectorally or occupationally. And so a lot of what we've been referencing there is something that he and his team can do the heavy lifting on for you. So feel free to reach out if you want to find out any more about any of these services on offer. I mentioned webinars, and we do actually have another webinar. Looks like you're back on, Duncan, with Will Cookson, who leads our work in the economic development space. So Will and Duncan will be thinking about this from a practical point of view of for LEPs and local authorities primarily, but should be an interesting watch and listen. So feel free to sign up to that one. The other thing Duncan and I will probably revisit webinars, and as we get some of that data coming and flowing, notably the unemployment data, probably after Easter, we'll probably look to put in a similar update webinar to this one, just keeping an eye on what's going on and what we've learned in the interim. So we will get details out and a date sorted very soon, so keep an eye on that one. We had our annual conference scheduled for May. We've been able to negotiate a new date for that one. We're hoping we can honor this one, but should be a really interesting session. Probably some new topics of discussion to be bringing forward, but ultimately the Great British Talent Challenge, whilst always a challenge and maybe a challenge that's changing, really does rely, in our view, of having good insight about both the supply and demand for labour. And a lot of what we've been talking about today is about continuing to unpick and understand that. And so we are taking bookings again. We've moved anyone who had booked onto the original date has been moved across and been notified. But hopefully the world will return to some degree of normality by October, such that we can run through that, and some great speakers and content lined up. Head to the web address at the top if you'd like to find out more or book your place. So I think that's us for now. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that of interest. Last thing is to hand back to Debbie just to find out if there were any specific questions that we can answer right here, right now.
Sure.
And otherwise, if not, we can always circulate our responses afterwards. Debbie.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, we've had quite a lot of questions, and as Andy says, we can always communicate with you after the webinar is finished. But just going back to Duncan, on the occupation slide that we saw, why would the software developer's role be down when obviously we would assume at the moment that there's more demand for that sort of thing because of the home working?
There's all kinds of reasons why. It may be that people have just stopped recruiting around technology industries. And to be fair, the sudden demand in home working will only affect a slice of the technology industry. In terms of, my brother's not a programmer, but he does work in virtualization, and I know he's working 12-hour days at the moment. But of course, advertising for people is one thing, getting them in place and working is another. So yeah, I'm not sure that would have such an effect. My feel from looking at the data is that a large number of industries have just put a stop on recruitment. Because they probably just want to see which way the land lies looking ahead. And programming is quite a fast-moving labour market. There's quite a lot of churn in that industry because it's high demand, and so you probably just see that in raw volume terms there really strongly. And
from jumping in myself to look at a few of these as we've kind of studied the dashboard over the days, there's still a massive stock of adverts. It's just that this is relative to what there were a little while ago, so there could still be a good 500,000 or so adverts still live, but I think you're probably right. Everyone's just taking stock right now until things settle.
Okay, the other question we've had a few questions, but one of the other questions was to do with is apprenticeship shown within this data at all?
To some extent, but not. It doesn't give that reliable coverage because it depends on how employers are advertising them and whether it's clear that it is an apprenticeship. So we don't tend to use it as a strong indicator on that one.
Okay, and the other question we have, which is the last one we can get to, is there any sense of how different seniority roles, so in other words, the grading of the seniority of the roles can be affected with start or graduate roles compared to experienced roles? Is there any sort of link between or comparative data on that?
I mean, we know that managerial and professional roles have been less affected than others. In terms of seniority within roles, that's actually quite difficult. It's one of the downsides of a good thing, which is age discrimination laws, is that employers are less likely to say whether they need more experienced workers or not. So actually not many postings do. We actually do tag for it where they do say it, but there is quite a reticence in saying that. Not many job postings do actually clearly say whether they want experience or not. So it's quite difficult to get a handle on that. By looking at roles over time, as I say, with a bit more time, the trends will become stronger. And by looking at particular roles and how they relate to each other, we might be able to get a handle on that, but it's not obvious yet.
Okay, that's great. That's fab. Thank you so much. That's a great webinar.
Great, thanks. And as it looks like there is a long list, so we'll take those away and answer those and put them and circulate that back out.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Great,
and we'll
thank
see
you. Stay safe, guys.